17 dead in 72 hours. Minneapolis rocked as ICE and FBI launched coordinated raids. 53 arrested. What triggered this sudden gang war?
Tonight, the Minnesota National Guard has been deployed to Minneapolis after a coordinated wave of gang violence left 17 people dead in 72 hours. Federal agents from ICE and the FBI have launched the largest joint operation in the city's history, targeting a Somali organized crime network responsible for assassinations, narcotics trafficking, and human smuggling. Over 200 federal agents are on the ground. 53 arrests have been made, and evidence suggests the violence was triggered by a power struggle inside a criminal empire that has controlled entire neighborhoods for nearly a decade. 11:47 p.m. North Minneapolis, Minnesota. The Lowry Avenue corridor stretched dark and empty under flickering streetlights. March snow had melted into black slush that pooled along cracked curbs. The air smelled like wet asphalt and exhaust. Temperature sat at 34 degrees. Fog rolled off the Mississippi River 2 blocks away, turning halogen lights into blurred halos. The neighborhood was silent except for the distant hum of traffic on Interstate 94. Then the silence was shattered by gunfire. Witnesses reported hearing at least 40 rounds fired in rapid succession near the intersection of Lowry and Penn Avenue. Multiple shooters, automatic weapons. The attack lasted less than 90 seconds. When Minneapolis police arrived 4 minutes later, they found 3 bodies sprawled across the sidewalk outside a corner store. 2 men, 1 woman, all shot multiple times at close range. Shell casings from AK pattern rifles littered the pavement. Blood pooled under the streetlights, steaming in the cold air. It was the 3rd mass shooting in 3 days. What investigators found would trigger a federal response unlike anything Minneapolis had seen since the civil unrest of 2020. The victims were identified within hours. All 3 were members of a Somali street gang known as the Riverside Boys, a violent faction operating in the Cedar Riverside and North Minneapolis neighborhoods. Intelligence analysts with the Minneapolis Police Gang Unit had been tracking the group for years, linking them to drug distribution, extortion, human trafficking, and contract killings. But the recent violence wasn't random street crime. It was the result of a war inside the organization, triggered by the arrest of its leader 6 weeks earlier. That leader was 37-year-old Mohammed Abdi Khalif, a Somali-American who had entered the United States as a refugee in 2001 and built one of the most brutal criminal enterprises in the upper Midwest. Khalif controlled drug pipelines stretching from Minneapolis to Columbus, Seattle, and San Diego. He ran human smuggling operations that transported undocumented migrants from East Africa through Mexico and into the United States. And he commanded a network of enforcers who used violence to eliminate rivals, silence informants, and maintain territorial control. When IC and FBI agents arrested Khalif in January during a pre-dawn raid at a house in Brooklyn Park, they believed they had decapitated the organization. They were wrong. Instead, his arrest ignited a succession war. By March 14th, the body count had reached 17. The victims included gang members, suspected informants, and 2 innocent bystanders caught in crossfire during a drive-by shooting near a playground in the Phillips neighborhood. The violence escalated with each killing. Automatic weapons, grenades, firebombings. The attacks were coordinated, brutal, and executed with precision that suggested military training. Minneapolis police were overwhelmed. The city's gang units were stretched beyond capacity. Patrol officers were pulled into emergency shifts, and residents in affected neighborhoods barricaded themselves inside their homes, terrified to walk the streets. On March 15th, Minnesota governor issued an executive order activating the National Guard. If you want to see how deep this goes, hit like right now. By dawn on March 16th, 350 National Guard troops had deployed to North Minneapolis, Cedar Riverside, and the Phillips neighborhood. Humvees rolled through intersections. Soldiers in tactical gear established checkpoints at key corridors. Helicopters circled overhead, equipped with infrared cameras and searchlights. The presence was overwhelming, visible, and designed to project force in neighborhoods where residents had lost faith that anyone could stop the violence. But the National Guard wasn't there to make arrests. That job belonged to federal agents. At 4:22 a.m., FBI, SWAT teams, IC Homeland Security Investigations agents, and ATF tactical units executed coordinated raids at 19 locations across the Twin Cities metro area. Flashbangs shattered windows. Battering rams tore through reinforced doors. Agents flooded inside with night vision and ballistic shields, voices cutting through darkness like blades. Federal agents, hands up. Get down now. Inside a duplex on the 2100 block of Emerson Avenue North, they found an arsenal. 17 AK-47 rifles, 9 handguns, for fragmentation grenades, 50,000 rounds of ammunition, body armor, encrypted radios, and a whiteboard covered in handwritten notes detailing rival gang members, addresses, and planned attacks. But investigators weren't finished. In the basement, forensic agents discovered something that changed the entire investigation. A steel gun safe containing $237,000 in cash, vacuum-sealed and stacked in bricks. Next to the cash sat 3 encrypted smartphones and a laptop connected to a server in Mogadishu. On that laptop were communications between the shooters and a figure who had been coordinating the violence from inside a federal detention facility. Mohammed Abdi Khalif, still giving orders from his cell. By 7:48 a.m., federal agents had arrested 53 individuals. The raids targeted mid-level enforcers, weapons suppliers, and financial facilitators who had been executing Khalif's instructions while he awaited trial. Among those arrested was a 31-year-old man identified as Khalif's second-in-command, taken into custody at a safe house in Bloomington with 4 kilograms of fentanyl, 11 firearms, and encrypted communication devices linked directly to Khalif's smuggled contraband phone inside the Sherburne County Jail. The scale of the operation was staggering. But what agents uncovered in the digital evidence made the gang war seem like just one layer of a far more dangerous network. Cyber forensic specialists with the FBI cracked the encrypted servers within 18 hours. What they found inside wasn't just gang coordination. It was a fully operational criminal enterprise with international reach, financial infrastructure, and connections that extended far beyond street-level violence. The organization operated under a name that had circulated in intelligence reports for years but had never been fully dismantled: the East African Syndicate. It controlled narcotics distribution across 6 states. It ran human smuggling routes from Somalia and Kenya through Central America and into the United States. It extorted Somali-owned businesses in Minneapolis, Columbus, and Seattle, demanding protection payments under threat of violence. And it funneled proceeds back to East Africa, where intelligence analysts identified transfers to groups with suspected ties to al-Shabaab. This wasn't just gang violence. This was transnational organized crime with terrorist financing links. One FBI official said it plainly: "We weren't dealing with a street gang. We were dealing with a criminal network that operated like a cartel and used violence to maintain power at every level." Within 48 hours, federal investigators had identified the full scope of the succession war. Khalif's arrest had created a vacuum. 3 factions inside the organization were competing for control. The violence wasn't random. It was a coordinated campaign to eliminate rivals, consolidate power, and prove dominance to international partners who were watching to see who would emerge as the new leadership. But the worst was yet to come. As forensic teams analyzed the seized communications, they discovered messages that made investigators' blood run cold. The gang hadn't just been killing rivals. They had been targeting witnesses scheduled to testify in Khalif's federal trial. 4 of the 17 victims were individuals who had agreed to cooperate with prosecutors. They had been identified, tracked, and executed in their homes, at their workplaces, and on the street. Witness intimidation had escalated to mass assassination. Comment fury if you're ready to see who enabled this. Federal prosecutors immediately moved to enhance security for remaining witnesses and requested emergency protective orders. But the revelation raised a terrifying question. How did the gang know who the witnesses were? The answer came from a source inside the investigation. A paralegal working for a defense attorney representing one of Khalif's co-defendants had been compromised. She had access to discovery materials, including witness lists, statements, and cooperation agreements. In exchange for $18,000 paid in cash over 6 months, she photographed confidential documents and transmitted them to the gang using encrypted messaging apps. When FBI agents arrested her at her apartment in St. Louis Park, they found copies of witness statements, court filings, and trial schedules stored on her personal laptop. She confessed immediately. She said the gang had threatened her family in Somalia. She said she didn't know the information would be used to kill people. She said she was terrified and didn't know how to stop. Type compromised if you want to see how they weaponized the justice system. Then everything shattered open. On March 23rd, federal prosecutors unsealed a superseding indictment that expanded the case to include racketeering, murder in aid of racketeering, witness tampering, narcotics trafficking conspiracy, human smuggling, money laundering, and material support for foreign terrorist organizations. The indictment named Mohammed Abdi Khalif as the lead defendant and charged 57 additional individuals, including the enforcers who carried out the killings, the suppliers who provided the weapons, and the paralegal who leaked witness identities. The case was prosecuted in federal court in Minneapolis. The trial lasted 9 weeks and included testimony from over 90 witnesses. Forensic experts presented ballistic evidence linking specific weapons to the shootings. Digital analysts detailed the encrypted communications that coordinated the attacks. Financial investigators traced money flows from street-level drug sales through Hawala networks and into offshore accounts controlled by the syndicate. But the most powerful testimony came from survivors. A woman who survived the Lowry Avenue shooting testified about watching her brother die on the sidewalk. She said, "He was trying to leave the gang. He told them he wanted out, and they killed him for it." A Somali business owner testified about the extortion he endured for 3 years. He said the gang demanded $5,000 per month or they would burn his store and harm his family. He said, "I paid because I had no choice. The police couldn't protect me. No one could." An FBI agent who led the investigation testified about the sophistication of the network and the brutality of its enforcement tactics. He said, "This organization used fear as a weapon. They killed witnesses. They terrorized communities. And they did it with precision and coordination that required resources, training, and leadership that extended far beyond Minneapolis." On September 11th, the jury returned guilty verdicts on nearly all counts. Mohammed Abdi Khalif was convicted of racketeering, 17 counts of murder in aid of racketeering, witness tampering, and narcotics conspiracy. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, to be served in a maximum security federal facility under special administrative measures that prohibit all outside communication. His co-defendants received sentences ranging from 15 to 50 years. The paralegal who leaked witness information was sentenced to 12 years and permanent disqualification from legal employment. During Khalif's sentencing, the judge said, "You built an empire on violence and fear. You exploited vulnerable communities, terrorized innocent people, and murdered those who dared to stand against you. You will spend the rest of your life in a cell, and the world will be safer for it." Hit subscribe so you see what happens next. But the violence didn't end with convictions. Federal agencies expanded their presence in Minneapolis, embedding agents in community organizations and increasing surveillance of known gang members. ICE launched targeted operations to identify and deport foreign nationals with gang ties. The FBI created a dedicated task force focused on dismantling human smuggling and narcotics networks operating in Somali American communities across the country. The National Guard remained deployed for 6 weeks, gradually drawing down as violence subsided. By May, homicides in North Minneapolis had dropped by 62%. Residents began to emerge from their homes. Businesses reopened, and community leaders began working with law enforcement to rebuild trust and address the systemic issues that allowed the gang to flourish. Share this so people understand how violence spreads when power goes unchecked. This story is a fictional dramatization, but the threat it represents is devastatingly real. Transnational gangs don't just commit street crime. They build empires. They terrorize communities. They exploit vulnerable populations and use violence to maintain control. And they operate with sophistication that rivals nation-states, using encrypted communications, international networks, and corruption to evade capture. Power doesn't always need legitimacy. Sometimes it only needs fear, silence, and communities too traumatized to fight back. The gangs count on that. They count on witnesses too terrified to testify, officials too overwhelmed to act, and systems too slow to stop them before the bodies pile up. But when communities refuse to stay silent, when federal agencies coordinate instead of compete, when witnesses risk their lives to speak truth, these empires collapse. They collapse hard, and the people who built them face justice. The question is, will we act before the next wave of violence begins? Comment vigilant below. Tap like so more people see this story.